The neighborhood was known for being quiet. Most days passed with little more than the sound of lawnmowers, kids riding bikes, and dogs barking behind fences. People waved, but kept to themselves. It was the kind of place where nothing unexpected ever seemed to happen. The man who lived near the corner lot liked it that way. He had moved there for peace, not drama. He worked long hours, came home tired, and enjoyed simple routines. Coffee in the morning, work during the day, and quiet evenings on his porch. He had bought the house after carefully checking everything. The paperwork, the boundaries, the rules. He was not careless by nature. Before signing anything, he read every page twice. He knew the property was part of a neighborhood with an HOA, and he accepted that. He followed the rules as best he could. He kept the yard clean, paid the fees on time, and avoided attention. At first, everything was fine. The neighbors seemed normal. Some were friendly, others distant. A few waved every morning. No one complained. For months, life went on without problems. Then small things started to change. It began with looks. Long looks from across the street. The HOA woman, who lived 2 houses down, often stood outside pretending to check her phone while staring at his property. She had a way of watching people that made them uncomfortable. Her posture was stiff, her expression sharp. She spoke loudly, even when no one was far away. People in the neighborhood had learned to avoid her when possible. At first, he thought nothing of it. Some people were just curious. Some liked to gossip. It did not concern him. He focused on his own life. But the looks became comments. Comments became questions. And questions slowly turned into accusations. One afternoon, as he was unloading groceries from his car, she walked up without greeting him. She stood too close, arms crossed, eyes scanning his driveway. She asked him what he thought he was doing with his property. He was confused. He asked what she meant. She pointed at the fence line and said it was not allowed. She claimed it crossed into shared space. Her tone was sharp, like she was already sure she was right. He calmly told her the fence had been there when he bought the house and was within his property line. She laughed in a way that felt mocking. She said the HOA would decide that, not him. He did not argue. He simply said he had the documents if there was any concern. She rolled her eyes and walked away, muttering that people like him always thought rules did not apply to them. That comment stayed with him. Over the next few weeks, notices appeared on his door. Warnings about minor issues that did not make sense. Grass length that was already within limits. Trash cans placed out at the wrong time, even though they were moved exactly when required. Each notice carried the same signature. He tried to ignore it. He fixed what did not need fixing. He adjusted things that were already correct. He believed cooperation would end the problem. Instead, it seemed to encourage more attention. Neighbors began to whisper. A few asked him if everything was okay. He nodded and smiled, not wanting trouble. He did not want to be known as the problem resident. He just wanted peace. One evening, he overheard her speaking loudly on the sidewalk. She was telling another neighbor that he was breaking rules and that the HOA was watching him closely. Her voice carried, meant to be heard. He felt a mix of anger and embarrassment, but chose not to respond. He reminded himself that facts mattered more than opinions. Still, the pressure grew. More letters. More stares. More comments made, just loud enough to hear. She began taking pictures of his house with her phone. Sometimes she stood in front of his driveway, snapping photos as if collecting evidence for something big. He decided it was time to review his paperwork again. One night, he spread everything across his kitchen table. Deeds, surveys, maps, HOA rules. He double-checked boundaries and measurements. Everything was clear. The property lines were exactly where he believed they were. He was not in violation. That gave him confidence, but also concern. If the facts were so clear, why was she pushing so hard? The answer became clearer one weekend morning. He was outside trimming a bush when she stormed over, this time with papers in her hand. She said the HOA had received complaints. She said he was using land that did not belong to him. She accused him of trespassing on community property. He calmly asked her to explain. She raised her voice instead. She said she had authority. She said he was lucky she had not taken further action yet. Neighbors paused their activities to watch. The street grew quiet. He told her again that his property was legally defined and that he had proof. He asked her to stop harassing him, to follow proper channels. That word made her furious. She told him he did not get to tell her how things worked. She said she would make an example of him. She said people like him always learn the hard way. Then she made the statement that changed everything. She said if he did not comply, she would call the police. The word police hung in the air. Neighbors exchanged looks. Someone quietly shook their head. Calling the police over a property line seemed extreme, but she looked confident, almost excited. He felt his heart rate rise, but kept his voice steady. He told her she was free to do whatever she felt necessary. He had nothing to hide. That calm response seemed to bother her more than anger would have. She walked away, phone already in her hand. That night, he sat alone thinking. He wondered how something so small had turned into something so serious. He wondered how power, even small power, could change people. He knew he had done nothing wrong. But he also knew truth did not always stop conflict. As the lights went out across the neighborhood, a feeling settled over him. This was no longer about rules or property. It was about control. And whatever was coming next would not stay quiet. The neighborhood that once felt peaceful now felt tense, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The days after the first confrontation were tense. The man tried to carry on with his routine, hoping the situation would fade. But the HOA woman seemed to sense that her first attempt had not achieved the reaction she wanted. She began showing up more often, sometimes just standing at the edge of her lawn and watching, other times knocking on doors to ask questions about him. Her presence was like a storm cloud hovering over his life, always there, always threatening. He noticed her noticing everything. The mailman, the delivery driver, even children playing on bikes seemed to catch her gaze. It was as if she was silently tracking every detail, every movement, waiting for a misstep. Even small actions felt magnified under her watchful eyes. Neighbors began to notice too. Some whispered quietly among themselves, unsure what was really happening. Others looked uncomfortable when she approached them, clearly aware of her intensity. He tried to maintain friendly contact, waving and nodding, but the energy between them had changed. His home, once a place of comfort, now felt like a stage where every action was judged. She did not let up. More letters appeared on his door, each one longer and more pointed than the last. She complained about trivial matters. A rake left in the corner, the angle of a garden hose, even the way leaves fell. Each note implied wrongdoing and hinted at consequences. The tone was never polite. It carried certainty that she was right and he was wrong. One morning, he found her taking photos of his backyard from the sidewalk. She waved her phone around like proof in a court of law. He stepped outside, calmly asking her to stop. She laughed in a sharp, dismissive way, saying that she had every right to document the situation. She claimed it was her duty to the HOA and the neighborhood. He did not raise his voice. He only reminded her that he was within his rights and had all the documentation to prove it. The calmness in his tone seemed to irritate her even more. Her face flushed, and she muttered under her breath as she retreated to her house. But it did not stop the photos. Neighbors could not help but watch. A few had doors open, curious about the ongoing tension. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Even those who had little interest in property disputes found themselves caught in the drama unfolding before their eyes. The man knew that ignoring the situation would not solve it. He decided to go through his documents once again. He spread surveys, deeds, and HOA guidelines across his kitchen table, double-checking every line. The boundaries were clear. Every corner of his property was within his rights. There was no mistake. But he also realized that facts alone might not stop someone who believed herself to be above questioning. He considered talking to the HOA board directly, hoping they would intervene and explain the rules clearly to her. But every interaction he had heard about seemed to encourage her behavior rather than control it. Her confidence was not just arrogance, It was a belief that she could bend rules to suit her own sense of authority. One afternoon, she approached him in front of a neighbor, this time with a printed report and notes in her hand. She read from it as if she were delivering a verdict. His fence was too high, his plants violated guidelines, and his outdoor decorations were unacceptable. Each point was exaggerated or outright false, but she delivered them with conviction. He listened carefully, replying politely and calmly. He asked her to explain which rules she was citing and reminded her that he had documentation proving compliance. The neighbor watching nearby whispered something clearly sympathetic, but she ignored them. The HOA woman's frustration was obvious. Her voice grew louder, her gestures sharper. She seemed almost desperate to provoke a reaction. The man stayed calm, understanding that losing his composure would only give her the power she wanted. Then she took a step further. She claimed that he was disrupting the neighborhood, that his presence on his own property was somehow a threat, and that the authorities should be involved. Her words were sharp and accusatory, meant to alarm anyone listening. The man knew this was the moment to remain unshaken. He responded politely but firmly that he had done nothing wrong and would provide proof if necessary. He made it clear that he respected the rules but expected to be treated fairly. The crowd of neighbors grew silent, absorbing the tension. Some had phones out, recording quietly, unsure what would happen next. It was clear that the confrontation was escalating beyond simple neighborhood complaints. For the man, the situation was draining. Days that had once been calm now carried anxiety. Every visit to the mailbox, every movement in the yard felt like walking through a gauntlet. He tried to focus on work and daily life, but the stress was constant. Sleep became harder, and small things, like the sound of a car outside, set him on edge. He began documenting everything himself. He took photos, kept notes of encounters, and recorded the dates and times of interactions. He knew that being prepared was the only way to protect himself. The paperwork that had once been a formality now became his shield against harassment. Even as he did this, he thought about the human side of the situation. The HOA woman was not acting out of malice alone. She seemed driven by a sense of control and fear of disorder. Understanding that did not make the situation easier, but it helped him stay calm. Anger would not solve the problem. Clarity and patience were his best tools. Weeks passed, each day building tension. The woman's actions became more public. She spoke loudly while walking down the street, telling anyone who would listen that he was a rule breaker and that the HOA was watching. Her confidence had a way of convincing people, even without proof. He noticed some neighbors avoiding him, uncertain how much to believe. Despite all this, he maintained his composure. He greeted neighbors politely, waved when he saw familiar faces, and never raised his voice. He focused on facts, on evidence, on remaining calm, even when provoked. It was a careful balance. Walking on the edge between patience and being pushed too far, he knew that any rash reaction could be used against him, while any inaction could embolden her further. Late one evening, he sat on his porch, looking at the street. The lights cast long shadows, and he could see the quiet houses across the way. He thought about how a peaceful life could turn complicated when someone used power without responsibility. He thought about fairness and truth, and how fragile they could seem in the face of stubbornness and fear. He decided that, when the moment came, he would present the truth clearly without emotion, and let the facts speak for themselves. He hoped the neighborhood would see through the drama, that neighbors would understand who was right, but he also knew that the situation was escalating. The woman had made her intentions clear. She wanted to control, to dominate, and possibly involve authorities. It was no longer just about complaints or letters. It was about perception, power, and who would be believed. The calm nights of his past seemed far away. The simple routines that had made life pleasant now carried tension. But he remained determined to act with integrity, patience, and clarity. He understood that truth, when presented correctly, could withstand false accusations. The stage was set. The neighborhood had gathered in quiet curiosity, waiting for what would happen next. The man had done all he could to prepare himself. Now, it was only a matter of time before the next act unfolded. And when it did, it would demand calm, courage. In careful thought, the day she decided to involve the police began like any other. With the sun rising slowly over the quiet streets, birds chirped, the morning air smelled of freshly cut grass, and a few neighbors were already outside, stretching or walking dogs. For the man, it was just another day of dealing with an overzealous HOA member, though deep inside he felt a tightening knot of concern. He had stayed calm through letters, stares, and public accusations. But the thought of the authorities becoming involved changed everything. He was trimming his front garden when she appeared, phone in hand, looking triumphant. Without any greeting, she declared that she had called the police. The words hung in the air, sharp and sudden. He paused. She had caught him off guard, but he stayed calm. He asked politely for clarification. She repeated her claim, insisting that he was violating rules, trespassing, and disturbing the neighborhood. Neighbors who had been nearby stopped to listen. A few stepped closer, curious but cautious, unsure how to act. The street, usually filled with calm routines, now carried tension thick enough to feel it in the chest. The man took a deep breath. He knew he had nothing to hide. He knew his property lines were correct, his actions within the rules. Still, he could not predict how others would react, especially with police involved. Within minutes, 2 police officers arrived, walking slowly up the street. Their presence brought an immediate hush to the neighborhood. Children paused on bicycles, dogs stopped barking, and even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. The officers approached the man and the HOA woman, greeting them politely and asking for details. The HOA woman, clearly excited, began her story immediately. She spoke loudly, pointing at the fence, the garden, and the decorations. She described violations, disruptions, and trespassing, emphasizing that he had ignored previous warnings. Her voice carried certainty, the kind of certainty that made casual listeners believe she was correct. Neighbors looked on with wide eyes, some nodding quietly, some frowning, unsure what to believe. The man remained calm, speaking slowly and clearly. He explained that his property lines were correct, that he had documents to prove ownership, and that he had followed all HOA rules. He handed over surveys, deeds, and official papers, giving officers a clear picture of the situation. He made no accusations, no angry comments, only statements of fact. He kept his tone steady, making it clear he respected the officers and wanted the matter resolved truthfully. The officers listened carefully. One took notes, while the other examined the documents. They asked questions, sometimes to clarify, sometimes to understand the perspective of both sides. The HOA woman grew frustrated as her confident story faced calm, factual resistance. She gestured, raised her voice, tried to dominate the conversation, but the officers did not let her interrupt or mislead. They treated the situation with professionalism, giving the man the chance to explain without interruption. As the discussion continued, neighbors could see the truth starting to emerge. The documents were clear, leaving little room for doubt. The man's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the HOA woman's rising frustration. Some onlookers whispered to each other, noting the difference between factual proof and loud accusations. Despite the tension, he continued to be respectful. He answered every question clearly, showing the boundaries, pointing out measurements, and explaining the history of the property. He did not need to argue, raise his voice, or make the situation personal. He simply presented the truth in a calm, methodical way. The HOA woman tried one last tactic. She insisted that the community had complained, that it was not only her concern, and that his actions affected everyone. But when the officers asked for specific complaints, she could not produce any credible evidence. Her voice faltered. Her statements became less confident. The officers remained neutral, professional, and attentive, giving weight to the documentation and factual explanation provided by the man. The tension on the street was palpable. People who had been watching quietly now murmured among themselves, realizing that the accusations were not matching the facts. Some neighbors stepped forward, commenting that they had never seen violations or disturbances. The woman's argument weakened further under scrutiny. Finally, one officer addressed the situation. He explained that the documentation proved ownership, that the actions were within the rules, and that no violation could be found. He also clarified that false reports could have serious consequences, warning her to avoid further accusations without proof. The HOA woman's face showed a mix of disbelief, embarrassment, and frustration. Her confidence, so loud and strong before, had begun to crumble. The man felt relief, but he did not celebrate. He remained composed, understanding that resolution required patience and respect, not gloating. The officers thanked him for providing clear evidence and for cooperating fully. They reminded the neighborhood that calm, factual communication was essential in disputes. Then they departed, leaving behind a sense of closure for the moment. Neighbors slowly returned to their routines, but the street had changed. They had witnessed the contrast between calm truth and aggressive assertion. Many reflected quietly, realizing that the situation could have escalated far more dangerously if the man had reacted with anger or if the officers had not been present. The HOA woman retreated to her home, muttering and fuming, but no one followed. She had lost the public argument, and it was clear to those watching that her version of events did not hold up. Her credibility had suffered, though she remained confident in private. For the man, this was a reminder that truth required patience, preparation, and restraint. That evening, he sat on his porch again, looking down the quiet street. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. He reflected on the events of the day, thinking about human behavior, power, and how easily fear and arrogance could distort reality. He also thought about the importance of remaining calm, using facts, and presenting truth clearly. The neighborhood had witnessed a lesson. Calm, reasoning, evidence, and respectful communication could withstand false accusations. The street that had seemed tense and uncertain now felt slightly restored, though he knew challenges were not entirely over. The HOA woman's determination had not disappeared, but the clear exposure of facts had shifted the balance. He felt a sense of cautious optimism. Life could return to normal, but he remained vigilant. He continued documenting everything, keeping evidence of all interactions, and remaining prepared for any further attempts at harassment. He knew that patience, clarity, and calmness would be his allies in any future conflict. That night, as lights dimmed across the neighborhood, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not because he had won a confrontation, but because he had maintained his integrity, protected his rights, and shown the power of calm, factual truth against false accusations. He understood that life would continue with challenges, but with preparation and composure. Even the most trying situations could be handled with dignity. After the visit from the police, a quiet tension lingered over the neighborhood. The man knew that while the immediate threat had passed, the HOA woman had not completely backed down. Her pride and insistence on control were still there, simmering beneath the surface. For him, the challenge was not only defending his property and rights, but also maintaining composure and patience as she processed the reality of her failed attempt. The next morning, he decided to review all interactions and document them in a more structured way. He created a binder, labeling sections for letters, photos, conversations, and notes from neighbors who had witnessed events. Every document and interaction was dated, and he made notes on context and details. He wanted clarity and organization, not just for potential future disputes, but also to give himself confidence that truth was on his side. Neighbors began to approach him quietly, offering words of support. Some admitted they had been confused by the HOA woman's earlier accusations, unsure what to believe. Others shared their own minor conflicts with her, expressing relief that someone finally addressed her behavior openly and calmly. The man listened, remaining humble and unassuming. Understanding that the neighborhood had learned more from the events than he could see. Meanwhile, the HOA woman seemed to retreat, but her retreat was not one of peace. She lingered in her yard, speaking loudly on the phone to friends or family, framing the situation as though she had been right and the police were too lenient. She made pointed comments as he moved around his property, but he ignored them, focusing on tasks rather than confrontation. Every time she attempted to provoke a reaction, he maintained calm and neutrality, refusing to validate her drama with emotional responses. One afternoon, a meeting was called by the HOA board. They wanted to clarify rules and address recent complaints. The man attended, armed with his documentation and a respectful demeanor. The room was tense, filled with neighbors and board members. Some looked skeptical, others curious. The HOA woman sat confidently at the table. Expecting to sway opinion through volume and presence, he spoke clearly, showing documents and explaining facts without aggression. He explained property lines, HOA rules, and previous interactions. He calmly detailed how he had cooperated at every step and acted responsibly. When the HOA woman attempted to interrupt, the board politely asked her to let him finish. She tried to regain control, but it was clear the room was listening to reason. Not volume questions came from neighbors and board members alike. Some were curious, others cautious, testing details. He answered each with patience, clarity, and respect. He did not speak negatively about the HOA woman personally, only about actions and facts. By the end of the meeting, the board had acknowledged his compliance with rules and noted that his documentation and cooperation had been thorough. After the meeting, some neighbors approached him privately, expressing relief and admiration for how he had handled the situation. They appreciated his calm and structured approach. A few admitted that they had been intimidated by the HOA woman's previous confidence, but realized now that facts and patience mattered more than loudness. The HOA woman, however, seemed frustrated. Her attempts to dominate conversations were now met with polite but firm resistance. The police visit and the board meeting had clarified that her claims did not hold. Her credibility was affected, and her attempts to control the neighborhood's perception were less effective. Still, she remained watchful, attempting small provocations, hoping to regain influence. The man understood that some people could not accept truth easily, especially when their sense of control was challenged. He remained patient, knowing that consistency over time would reveal the facts to everyone. He continued documenting every action, every encounter, and every new complaint, understanding that preparation was the best defense. One evening, he reflected on how the neighborhood dynamics had changed. Before, the HOA woman's behavior had created uncertainty, tension, and fear of confrontation. Now, neighbors were more aware, more confident, and more willing to question overreach. The man felt a sense of accomplishment, not for himself, but for the truth and fairness that had been restored to the community. He also reflected on human behavior. He understood that fear, pride, and a need for control could distort perception and create unnecessary conflict. Seeing this firsthand had given him insight into patience, empathy, and resilience. Maintaining composure under pressure had not only protected him, but also provided an example for others in the neighborhood. The next few weeks were calmer, though vigilance remained important. The HOA woman had not escalated to police calls again, though she still watched from a distance, muttering occasionally. He continued his routines, tending his garden, fixing small issues, and focusing on daily life. The community, now more observant and engaged, seemed to breathe easier. Gradually, the lessons of the situation settled in. The importance of calm reasoning, documentation, and respectful communication became clear. Neighbors saw the value of standing by facts and truth rather than reacting to loud accusations. The man had not sought conflict, but by handling it with patience and dignity, he had created a shift in the neighborhood's awareness. Evenings returned to a more peaceful rhythm. Lights came on in homes, children played without interruption, and dogs barked at normal hours. The man felt a renewed sense of comfort and safety, knowing he had acted correctly and truthfully. While the HOA woman remained a presence in the community, her ability to manipulate perception and spread false claims was diminished. He understood that challenges could come from unexpected places, even in quiet neighborhoods. But he also knew that preparation, patience, and integrity could withstand attempts at intimidation. The truth, when calmly and clearly presented, carried weight that arrogance and loudness could not overcome. Sitting on his porch one evening, watching the neighborhood settle into quiet, he felt a sense of balance restored. The street no longer carried the heavy tension that had dominated the previous weeks. He reflected on the events, realizing that Even in the face of aggression and falsehood, calmness and facts were powerful tools. The community had witnessed a lesson in fairness, patience, and integrity. The HOA woman's actions had inadvertently shown everyone the importance of standing by truth without resorting to anger or retaliation. And while challenges remained, the neighborhood now understood that reasoned, respectful action could prevail over baseless accusations and attempts at control. After weeks of tension and careful patience, life in the neighborhood slowly began to find its rhythm again. The man continued his daily routines with a sense of calm that had been absent for some time. The lessons he had learned through this ordeal were not just about property lines or HOA rules, but about patience, integrity, and the quiet strength of truth. He knew the final part of this story would be about understanding consequences and how the neighborhood, as a community, would grow from the experience. The HOA woman had not called the police again, at least not yet, but she remained a figure to be cautious of. She was still present, walking the streets, occasionally muttering comments to herself or loudly telling anyone who would listen that she had been right. Yet her influence had diminished significantly. Neighbors had begun to question her claims, realizing that truth, combined with calm and evidence, outweighed loud accusations. Conversations about her actions became more balanced, with many people quietly acknowledging that the man had been correct all along. Neighbors who had once stayed neutral or avoided involvement began to engage in small ways. Some stopped by to check if he was all right. Others shared experiences with similar minor disputes. A few mentioned how they had feared speaking up previously, worried that the HOA woman's confidence would overpower their own voices. The man listened, offering advice and encouragement, emphasizing the importance of facts, patience, and respectful communication. He understood that rebuilding trust and confidence in the neighborhood is just as important as resolving his own issues. He also noticed subtle changes in the way people interacted. Small acts of kindness and neighborliness returned. Mailboxes were checked with casual greetings. Lawns were tended with a sense of community rather than competition. And children played without fear of being unfairly criticized for trivial matters. The street regained its sense of quiet charm, with the awareness that fairness and respect could coexist with community rules. One afternoon, a neighbor who had remained silent during most of the confrontation approached him with a warm smile. They expressed gratitude for how he had handled the situation, noting that his calmness had set an example for everyone. They admitted that, initially, they had been intimidated by the HOA woman's intensity. But seeing him respond with patience and evidence had inspired them. The man thanked them quietly, feeling a sense of fulfillment that went beyond personal victory. It was about community growth and mutual understanding. The HOA woman, sensing her influence waning, tried subtle attempts to regain control. She questioned small details, made comments about procedures, and looked for opportunities to assert authority. Yet, her words were now met with polite but firm responses. Neighbors, aware of the truth, supported the man indirectly by observing and listening critically. Her previous tactics of intimidation no longer worked as effectively. The balance had shifted. The man continued documenting interactions, not out of paranoia, but out of prudence. He knew that some people never fully let go of their need for control, and being prepared was a way to protect himself and maintain peace. His records, clear and organized, also became a resource for neighbors who sought advice or guidance on handling similar situations. His calm approach and factual preparation served as a model, demonstrating that confrontation did not need to escalate when handled with clarity and patience. As weeks turned into months, the neighborhood atmosphere improved further. The initial tension, which had felt heavy and oppressive, had lightened. People were more willing to ask questions, communicate openly, and rely on facts rather than assumptions. The man's composure had set a tone for the community. Residents began to see that fairness, honesty, and clear communication were powerful tools against intimidation or false claims. One evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sun set, he reflected on the journey. The experience had taught him much about human behavior, the importance of preparation, and the quiet power of integrity. He realized that the HOA woman's actions, though disruptive, had ultimately strengthened the community's awareness and resilience. People had learned to think critically, observe carefully, and support each other without escalating conflict unnecessarily. In his reflection, he also thought about personal growth. The ordeal had tested his patience, his ability to remain calm under pressure, and his understanding of human nature. It had been challenging, sometimes stressful, but it had reinforced his confidence in handling adversity with respect and clarity. He felt stronger, more grounded, more capable of navigating difficult situations in the future. The HOA woman, despite her lingering presence, could no longer command the same attention or respect. Her attempts to manipulate perception had been countered by calm truth and community awareness. The man understood that some people may never fully accept reality, but they could be neutralized by consistency, facts, and composure. It was not about defeating her personally, but about maintaining integrity and protecting the neighborhood environment. As the community settled, small acts of collaboration became common. Neighbors helped each other with minor tasks, shared advice on property maintenance, and offered support when disagreements arose. The experience had fostered a sense of connection, showing that even tense situations could lead to positive outcomes if handled correctly. The man continued living his life with simplicity and focus. He tended his garden, greeted neighbors politely, and maintained his home within the rules. The tension that once dominated his days had eased, replaced by a sense of peace and stability. He understood that vigilance remained necessary, but that fear no longer governed his actions. Occasionally he saw the HOA woman watching from a distance, but he no longer felt anxiety. He had faced the situation with truth and patience, and the neighborhood had seen the facts. Her presence was now a reminder of what had been overcome, rather than a source of ongoing stress. The community had learned lessons in fairness, truth, and respectful confrontation, and he had been at the center of demonstrating those principles. Reflecting on the overall experience, he realized that life often throws unexpected challenges, even in quiet, well-ordered communities. People's behavior, pride, and desire for control can create obstacles that seem disproportionate. Yet, by remaining calm, documenting facts, and communicating respectfully, it is possible to navigate difficult circumstances successfully. The journey had not been easy, but the outcome validated patience, clarity, integrity as tools for resolving conflict. The man's story became quietly known among neighbors. They respected how he had handled the situation, appreciated his calm and structured responses, and understood the importance of standing by truth without aggression. The HOA woman's actions were remembered, but they no longer intimidated anyone. Instead, they served as a cautionary example of how confidence without facts could falter when faced with patience, clarity, and calm reasoning. The neighborhood continued to function with a sense of community, fairness, and awareness. People were more attentive, more willing to speak up respectfully, and more likely to support each other in disputes. The man's approach had shown that confrontation could be managed without escalation, and that even challenging personalities could be neutralized through preparation, facts, and calm persistence. In the end, the man felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not from personal victory, but from the restoration of balance and fairness. The neighborhood had emerged stronger, more connected, and more aware of the power of truth and composure. Life returned to a peaceful rhythm, with lessons learned and respect regained. He had faced conflict, maintained integrity, and shown that truth, patience, and human decency could triumph over intimidation and false accusations. Sitting quietly on his porch, watching the street grow dark as lights flickered on in nearby homes, he knew the neighborhood had changed for the better. People had seen the value of calm reasoning, clear documentation, and respectful engagement. The HOA woman's actions, though disruptive, had ultimately led to greater awareness and resilience within the community. And for the man, the experience reaffirmed that integrity, patience, and truth were the most powerful tools in any conflict, providing peace and strength even in challenging times.